Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel. And obviously we're not doing our daily lockdown videos anymore, but as we said with our last video last week or maybe the week before, we would be doing them ad hoc. So obviously tonight we're going to do a video, and it's quite an important video because I'm going to update you on the Mayflower and the pilgrims that were aboard that Mayflower. Now, for those that have only just tuned in to our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram or YouTube channel, you're probably thinking, what's Mayflower got to do with maybe Worcestershire, or even Discover History? Well, going back a couple of years now, we knew that 2020 and 2021 is really the anniversary, the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower and the Pilgrim Fathers leaving originally Leiden in Holland, and then crossing over to England, picking up the Speedwell and obviously the Mayflower ship, and then going across the Atlantic all the way to the Americas. So it's the famous Mayflower journey, basically. Now, the link is mainly down to the fact that this man, who we have shown in other videos, if you go on the playlist and look up Mayflower 400, you will see it there. That is a man called Edward Winslow. And to keep it brief, because we mentioned him quite a few times in the other videos, he was born in Droitwich and he was educated at Worcester King's School and then went across with the Mayflower. So we were involved from about, I think it was about 2018, in the planning of Mayflower 400. And obviously with COVID-19 last year, it curtailed a lot of the celebrations of the Mayflower sailing, basically. But we're going to continue with it, and there will hopefully be a number of events this year across Britain and also in America, celebrating what happens next. Now, as I mentioned, if you go through the playlist and look up Mayflower 400, the last video that we did on the Mayflower was back in 2020, and I think it was around about November time. I think it was the middle of November, in fact, because I do mention Thanksgiving coming up, which is obviously the end or towards the end of November. So what we're going to do is continue where we left off with the other video. So back in November, the Mayflower, there she is there, that's the replica one that's still in existence today, had reached America with 102 souls on board. And that ship docked, or shall we say anchored, just off America. And that is a contemporary map of New England, as it was often referred to. We've got Cape Cod just coming off down there. So by November, the Mayflower had anchored in the bay just of here, and they were having to make a lot of decisions. They were having to decide on whether to go ashore at that point, maybe to take one of their little boats that were on board the Mayflower and take it up one of the creeks or one of the rivers to find a habitable area. And you have to remember, to the people on board the ship, they were going into the wilds of the frontier, a place which was known to be wild and full of native people, and as they would have seen them at the time, as savages, which is absolutely horrible word for them, because we know now that they were definitely not savage people. They were a community which was very much linked to nature, really. It's very much like our ancestors back in the Stone Age, for example. But they were aboard this ship and they were having to make that decision. And we know they actually drew up in 1620, so we mentioned this last year, what was known as the Compact, basically. And it was a little charter that was put together. And you will notice, and this is only a transcript of it, we do have on there Edward Winslow, and that just proves that he was quite an influential person on board the Mayflower. So they were trying to decide what to do, and in the end they decided that they would spend the winter on board the ship. So when we get into December 1620, they stayed aboard the ship, And as I mentioned in the other video, they did hear some sort of commotion on the land, which I would have heard from the ship. And it is believed to be perhaps some sort of disagreement or even a little fight between native peoples living on the shoreline, really. But the interesting thing is they stayed aboard, and the man here, Miles Cavendish, he was really wanting to get ashore, take some guns ashore and start building a settlement. But there was a lot of discussion if it should be here, there, or should they move inland, which would be warmer in the winter months. But John Carver, this man here, he was the very important man that brought together several contracts to do the journey. He actually said that we would stay aboard and then we would reconnoiter inland, and that's exactly what he did. So when you get to January and February 1621, so a few months ago, 400 years ago, there was a few expeditions onto the land. So they put the little boats into the water, they jumped aboard, put some armour on, took their muskets and powder with them and went ashore, and they carried out a reconnaissance on the land, and they couldn't really see much until we get to sort of late February into March. And we know at that time John Carver stumbled across a village, and it was a Native American Indian village, but it looked deserted. And John Carver actually said there was no one around. It looked as if everyone literally dropped everything and went. He even said there was things dotted around that looked as if they left in a hurry. But it was a nice enough place. It was flat. It was far enough from the coastline to be warmer than being on the coastline. And obviously these reconnaissance missions led to meetings on board the ship. So they then went back on the land and they discussed further what was going to happen next. The sad thing is, by February, a lot of the pilgrims and also the strangers, remember, on board the ship were getting very, very ill. And they were mainly getting ill from things like scurvy. Scurvy is mainly down to the fact there is no vitamin C, so no fresh fruit or vegetables. And this led to all sorts of things. For example, bleeding gums, old wounds opening up, aching joints, sunken eyes, pale complexion. Many of them also contracted dysentery, mainly due to the insanitary conditions that they had whilst on board that ship. And because it was so damp and cold, many of them, it was said to have had pneumonia. So you can imagine this ship's crew, the strangers, the pilgrims, wanting to at least set foot on land. If you can imagine, they left in the summer, late summer of 1620, sailed across the sea, and even now in 1621 they were still aboard that stinking hulk of a ship. It must have been absolutely horrific. They would have prayed, they would have loved to have got onto the land where nothing was moving for the first time in months. So you can imagine there's some problems. So there was illness. Do we go ashore? Do we overwinter? But like I said, they overwintered initially on board the ship. But that brings us up to more up-to-date news, really. And what they decided to do is repair some of the huts and build their own huts on where the native village used to be. And that's exactly what they did at the start of March. Now, by the 16th of March, 1621, so today, and that's why we're doing this video today, by the 16th of March, 1621, whilst the pilgrims were working on some of the huts and clearing the land of branches and rubbish that had been blown down over the winter, for example, they then found that they could see a Native American Indian, a native person, walking towards them on his own. And at first they were a bit fearful because they had heard screams and shouts on the land. They were told about the savages in the country, so they were a bit worried. And you can imagine some of them would have grabbed muskets, for example, started loading muskets, or maybe even putting armour on, thinking this was going to be a major attack. And then slowly this Indian came towards them. Now, there are many illustrations of this incident, and this comes from a fantastic Victorian book. And I've decided to print it off so you can actually see it. And what you see here is stylized pilgrims. Obviously, we know they didn't wear black. We know they didn't all wear these black hats, and we definitely know they didn't have buckles at the front, for example. But it's a stylized image of the Pilgrim Fathers, as they were often referred to. And in the back are some of the newly constructed huts. And here we have a native person. And at the bottom, it actually tells you what's going on here. So it's the 16th of March, 1621. In the area that we now call Plymouth, or Plymouth Rock as they often refer to it, really. And this Indian is a man called Somerset, and he actually wanders in, and if you believe the story, he wanders into where the pilgrims are, and he's actually gesturing as if he wanted a drink. And the pilgrims first of all thought, well, maybe he had been on a long journey and he required refreshments, he needed water. But then, interestingly, and I find this quite a quirky bit of the story, the native Indian is actually not only gesturing for a drink, but he actually mentions, in quite good English to be fair, the word beer. And he wants beer. He wants beer from these people. And he recognises them as people not from that land, obviously, especially by what they're wearing. And it sounds odd because people often say, well, how did he know that they would have beer, for example? And you have to remember, everyone drank beer because water was so dangerous. And this Indian here probably met with fishermen. Because as I mentioned in my previous video, a lot of fishermen went ashore to take on supplies, especially fresh water, and mend nets and that sort of thing, carry out some repairs whilst fishing in the deep water near America. So these native people would have been possibly interacting with fishermen. So they probably picked up some of the English words, including the word for beer. But that actually happened today. So it's quite an important part of the story, which is why I wanted to mention it on the 16th of March. So you have the first contact between the native people and the pilgrims. They actually come together for the first time. Now, Somerset actually sits with the pilgrims, and people like Edward Winslow wanted to learn more about these people. And we actually know that after a long period of talking and drinking of the beer, it was said that the Indian who was from the Wampanoag tribe he actually announced that his tribe was being bullied by another more powerful tribe, and he basically wanted help. So he actually saw these Englishmen as such, really, not as an enemy, but someone who he could use to help fight off these bullies that were bullying the Wampanoag tribe. So it's quite interesting, really. You've got this interaction, and you can see that the English are probably thinking, well, we could make use of the Indian, in other words, showing us how to live on this land. And then the other way round, the Indian actually realises that he could use the Englishman's guns and gunpowder to help get rid of the bullies that are in the area. So it's quite interesting how we got this interaction going on. So the 16th of March is important, and it's really down to that one major incident. And like I said, we remember the Mayflower sailing because Edward Winslow, this man from Worcestershire, was aboard at the time. So it's quite an interesting part of the story. Anyway, on that note, hopefully you are enjoying the spring weather. Hopefully many of you have probably had the vaccine now and you're staying very, very well. And obviously we can actually now see a light at the end of the tunnel. Work is improving in our world as well, and we're staying healthy and getting ready to go back to normal duties as the weeks go by, especially by the end of the month. So hopefully you've enjoyed our short video, and remember, we're not going to do one daily, especially now lockdown is slowly easing, but we will do videos every now and again like this one. So as always, stay safe and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.